Okay. It gives me great pleasure to introduce Eric and give you a little bit of his biography. He's practiced law for 35 years. He was a graduate of Osgoode Hall Law School, earning his LLB in 1974. I was 4. He then attended the University of Oxford and completed a master's degree in 1975. He practiced litigation for a short period of time after being called to the bar in 1977. From 1978 to 84, he was a research lawyer at the Ontario Law Reform Commission, where he worked on various projects for the reform of Ontario's debtor-creditor laws and many other projects. In 1984, he joined what was then McCarthy and McCarthy, now McCarthy Thoreau, I hope I didn't massacre that terribly, where he was the director of research for almost 30 years. As the director of research, he assisted lawyers in all fields, and when the firm became Canada's first national law firm, he provided assistance to lawyers in all of the firm's offices. He's worked on a number of Canada's most significant legal cases, perhaps the best known being the case of International Corona Resources versus LAC Minerals. He's co-edited a leading case book on debtor-creditor law, edited a number of other legal texts. He co-founded the Supreme Court Law Review in 1978 and edited the journal for 10 years. He was an adjunct professor for 30 years at 4 of Ontario's law schools, including Osgoode and University of Toronto Faculty of Law. Before and since his retirement as a partner at McCarthy Thoreau, he has taught more than a dozen courses on a variety of subjects at Ryerson University's Life Institute, a leading provider of continued educational programs, including a course on law and the Holocaust. And of course, most recently, he's adding us to his incredibly impressive CV. He's also spoken on Holocaust-related subjects at the Tolerance Education in Rancho Mirage, California. Wow. We are so privileged and honored to have you, Eric. Please, the floor is yours.
Thank you for that lovely introduction. The name of the firm is McCarthy Thoreau.
I did massacre it.
So I'm very happy to be speaking to you all today. I'm glad you traveled a very long distance to join me on my first foray into a Zoom lecture. And today's topic, as you are aware, are athletes in the Holocaust. So you might ask why I picked this topic and why I've spoken on this topic before. And the reason is pretty simple. There is obviously a lot of information available about the Holocaust, and those who have some knowledge of the Holocaust basically know the basic facts. The role of athletes, Jewish athletes, before and during and after the Holocaust is not a subject that is the focus of much discussion. If anything, the people would know about the Berlin Olympics and the inability of German Jewish athletes to participate. And I'm going to touch on that, but that's certainly not the be all and end all of this story. So I'm going to begin by talking about Jewish athletes before Hitler came to power in 1933. So my basic knowledge of Jewish athletes in that period really extended to maybe 3 individuals. They are Hank Greenberg, a great Jewish baseball player who interrupted his time as a player in the major leagues by serving 4 years in the US Army during the Second World War. And despite the fact that he lost 4 years of his career, Hank Aaron still had an incredible career, had over 350 home runs, and has been inducted into the Hall of Fame. The other athlete that I was aware of was a quarterback, a Jewish quarterback for the Chicago Bears, Sid Luckman, who led his Chicago Bears to 4 NFL championships in the 1940s. And the last one that I was aware of in any significant detail was Max Baer, a boxing champion from the US, And I only knew about him because his son, Max Baer Jr., played Jethro on the Beverly Hillbillies. So that was his claim to fame. But as a result of that, my father, who would often watch the show with me, would explain that Max Baer was a famous boxer. And his real claim to fame as a Jewish boxer is he defeated a one-time world champion, Max Schmeling, who was the great boxer during the Hitler era. He never joined the Nazi Party, and he did have some sympathies for the Jews. His promoter was Jewish, and he is credited with saving 2 young Jewish boys that he hid in his house for a while after Kristallnacht, and then was able to get them out of the country to Switzerland. Although he's not recognized as a righteous among the nations, the boys that he saved acknowledge that without him, they probably would not have survived the war. So that was really the extent of my knowledge of Jewish athletes. But once you dig into the material, you realize that there were many world outstanding Jewish athletes in the pre-war period. And it's interesting, when you go into the material, you'll see that there were Jewish athletes, especially in the Olympic period, from the first Olympics in 1896 until today. And of course, the only interruptions in that string were during the First World War and the Second World War, when no Olympics were held. Even in the 1936 Berlin Olympics, there were a couple of Jewish athletes who did participate from Germany, but also many other Jewish athletes from many other countries. So I just wanted to highlight some of that information for you. And to do that, I have to look at my notes because I haven't memorized all these statistics. In 1896, in the first Olympics, Jewish athletes won 9 gold medals, 1 silver medal, and 1 bronze medal, basically in 3 events: gymnastics, where the majority of the gold medals were won; swimming, where there were 3 gold medals; and cycling, where there was 1 gold medal and 2 silvers. And if you go through the years, which you can do on a number of different websites, you will see that virtually every year that the Olympics were held, Jews were successful at the Olympics in a variety of different events, including track, weightlifting, swimming, wrestling, and insofar as the Winter Olympics were concerned, ice skating, ice hockey, and boxing. So just to run down quickly through some of these statistics: 1900, the Jews won 6 medals. 1904, Jewish athletes won 5. 1908, they won 13. 1912, they won 14. 1916, there weren't Olympics because of the war. 1920, there were 9. 1924, there were 13. 1928, 13. And in 1932, in the combined Winter and Summer Games, which of course at that time were held in the same year, Jewish athletes won 25 medals in a whole variety of sports, representing a number of different countries. So there is a long history of Jewish athletes performing at world-class level, and obviously that still continues today. Of course, as I said before, what probably most of us know best about Jewish athletes in the pre-war and war period is what happened to Jewish athletes during the Berlin Olympics. And as you know, there were a number, as I said, a number of Jewish athletes from a variety of different countries. And I'm going to talk about briefly about 2 Jewish athletes who performed, but I'm also going to talk more significantly about 1 Jewish athlete who was prevented from performing in her specialty at the Berlin Olympics. But before I do that, let's start with the prelude to the Berlin Olympics in 1936. This was, in a sense, the perfect political storm. The Olympic Games for 1936, both winter and summer, were awarded to Germany in 1931, before Hitler rose to power. Of course, Hitler rose to power in January of 1933, And almost immediately after coming to power, Hitler basically abdicated the Weimar Constitution. He introduced something called the Enabling Act, which allowed him to suspend the Constitution and start to take away the rights of Jews of all stripes in Germany, and obviously subsequently in many other countries that were occupied by the Germans. So in 1933, for example, Hitler removed citizenship from German Jews. People in the various professions like doctors and lawyers were dismissed from their positions. Eventually, all Jews in any real field in which they came into contact with Aryans were dismissed from their positions. That included teachers, as I said, all kinds of professionals. And that continued, especially when the Nuremberg laws were passed in 1935, 1 year before the Olympics was to take place. The Nuremberg laws were introduced in 1935, and they basically set out, among other things, who would be considered to be Jewish for purposes of German law. And while it's not, the focus of my comments today, it's important to understand that everything that Germany did vis-a-vis the Jews was done according to law. They passed laws. Obviously, there wasn't really a parliamentary or a democratic system, but they still did everything by the book, as one would expect of the Germans. So then we come to 1936. And one of the prominent athletes in Germany, Jewish athletes in Germany at the time, was a woman high jumper, which I'll come back to in a moment. But clearly, the world was concerned about the Berlin Olympics and the actions that the Germans were taking vis-a-vis the Jews leading up to the Berlin Olympics. And there was a great deal of talk, and it was really just that, talk about boycotting the Olympics. Many countries contemplated that. The Americans discussed it, but rejected it. And in the end, there was only one country that would have otherwise participated that boycotted the Berlin Olympics in 1936, and that was Spain. And the reason for that was shortly before the Games, Spain had elected a left-wing government, and they decided that they would not participate in games in a fascist country. They proposed holding an alternative games, which hopefully those who were interested in boycotting the games would join. But in the end, although there were individual athletes who were prepared to go to the People's Games, as they were called, eventually the games never took place because it was really the beginning of the Spanish Civil War. And so even though they had a magnificent stadium for the People's Games, they never took place. Just as a side note, the stadium that they had, and which were going to be the focus of the 36 People's Games, ended up being the Olympic Stadium for the 1992 Barcelona Games. So if you watch those games, you will have seen the stadium that was proposed to be used for the People's Games in 1936. So as I said, countries really didn't boycott the games. There were all kinds of assurances given by Hitler that Jewish athletes would be allowed to participate. And what he did do was he did allow one half-Jewish athlete to participate as part of the German team, a woman fencer who had been a successful Olympian before, Helene Mayer. She actually was no longer living in Germany at the time. She was living in the United States. And shortly after the Olympics, she returned to the United States, but she was considered to be a member of the German team. And she did win a silver medal in her fencing event. There was another Jewish athlete in the Winter Games, a hockey player by the name of Rudi Ball. And the Germans wanted to ensure that he would not participate in the ice hockey tournament. And Hitler had great hopes for the German team to be successful at those games. Rudi Ball basically was told he shouldn't participate, but the other major player on that team told the German organization that if Ball was not allowed to play, he would not play thereby dashing any hopes that the Germans might have had for a medal. And of course, Wahl did play. He was successful in scoring a couple of goals, but he was injured, and that meant the demise of the German ice hockey team that never won any medal and was roundly defeated by a lesser power at the time, the United States. So those are two athletes who did participate in the games, but others were kept out of the games. Another woman by the name of Lillian Henoch, who was a track star in 4 different events, she was prevented from participating. But now I want to tell you the story of probably the most significant athlete, Jewish athlete at the time from Germany, who was prevented from participating in the games. Her name was Gretel Bergman. She later married a man by the name of Lambert, Dr. Lambert, but she was specifically prevented from participating in the games in her event, the high jump, despite the fact that she was at the time the German record holder in that event. So I want to play a short clip of Gretel Bergman discussing her fate at the 1936 Olympics. So while we're trying to set that up, let me give you a little bit of the background to her. As I said, Gretel Bergman was the record holder in Germany for the high jump at the time. She was 22 years old in 1936, but she had left Germany in 1933 when it came to power because her parents were concerned about her safety. She left, as I said, she left Germany and went to England, where she did participate in her event while she was attending school. And as she was successful in Germany, she was equally successful in England.
Eric?
Yes.
It's Sigal here. I'm having some internet problems, but let me try one more solution. I just didn't want to interrupt you too many times.
Okay.
I apologize, everybody. I tried to dry run to make sure this exactly wouldn't happen.
I see her.
See her? Hang on.
Yeah, I did see her.
And now you don't.
I don't.
Do you see this, everybody?
Among those in attendance tonight for the women's high jump competition is Margaret Berg.
Are you seeing this screen, everyone?
No.
No.
No picture.
Okay, hang on. Oh, technology, I love it when it works.
Okay, we now see the picture.
Is that the right video?
Yes.
Yes.
YouTube. 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 YouTube.
Okay. Sigal, let's pass on this one. We'll try again with the next one.
Usually.
Okay, so Gretel Bergman, as I said, was the record holder in the high jump in Germany. As I said, she left for England at the request of her parents. In 1936, her parents received a letter from the German Olympic Committee demanding that their daughter
Among those in attendance tonight for the
return to Germany to participate in the 1936 Berlin Olympics. And there was implicit in the letter that if she did not return, their fate would not be a good one. So as an obedient daughter concerned about her parents, she did in fact return to Germany and started practicing there for her competition at the Berlin Olympics. At the last minute, well, within the last week before the games started, she received a letter from the German Olympic Committee telling her that she could not participate. And the reason they had given was that her recent performances were not up to snuff, and therefore she was precluded from participating in the games. Now, the interesting story is, of course, the German government, the Nazi regime, expected one of their athletes to win that event. And they had a number of athletes who were participating in the event. And there was one leading athlete who they thought would win the gold medal in high jump. Unfortunately, that person did not win and came in fourth. A German athlete did come in third, but the woman who won the high jump that year was a Jewish athlete from Hungary. So of course, Gretel Bergman was terribly disappointed, and even more disappointed when much later the story came out that the German hope for a gold medal, who came in fourth, turned out to be a man who the Germans were putting forward as a woman, either because she was sort of mixed genetically or they were just trying to pass her off as a woman. So even with a man competing in the event, Gretel Bergman's record for the high jump for Germany would have won the event in 1936. After being precluded from participating in the games, she left Germany, went back to England, eventually went to America, married Dr. Lambert, and Gretel Bergman lived to the ripe old age of 103. She died in 2017. And if you were able to see this video, you would see that what she was most upset about in not being able to participate in the games was her desire to prove to the Germans that a German Jewish girl could beat those Aryan competitors. And she was denied that opportunity. When she went to the States, she also continued to participate in the high jump, but her real glory years would have been that 1936 Berlin Games. She vowed never to return to Germany after that. And again, if you'll see the clip, which was recorded at the 1996 Atlanta Games, she was invited to the Atlanta Games by the German government as a special guest of the German government, and she agreed to go. Before that, a year before that, I believe, her high school was named after her in Germany, and she refused to attend that ceremony. And eventually, she was given other great honors by the German government. For example, one of the streets in the Berlin Olympic Park was named after her. Another stadium was named after her. And eventually she did reconcile with the Germans, but she never forgave the German government for denying her the opportunity to participate in those Berlin Games. Now, I said in the Berlin Games, there were a number of Jewish athletes who competed. Helen Mayer, as I said, won the silver in fencing. Udi Ball in the Winter Olympics did not win a medal, but there were 9 other Jewish athletes from a variety of different countries who did participate in the Berlin Games and won medals for a variety of different countries. Hungary, the United States, even an athlete from Canada, who I will mention in a moment. But of course, there were a number of athletes who did boycott the games individually. And there were a number of Jewish athletes in particular who boycotted the games. They weren't all Jewish. There were some non-Jews who boycotted the games. But there were a number of significant Jewish athletes who refused to participate. And so I'm just going to read you a list of some of those athletes because some of those names might be familiar to some of you. So for example, there was Albert Wolf, who was a fencer from France, 2 Canadian boxers, Sammy Luftspring and Norman Yak, otherwise known as Baby Yak, who I heard a great deal of from my late father-in-law. Eva Dawes was a Canadian non-Jewish athlete who refused to go and was intending to attend the People's Games in Barcelona, but that never happened. Ruth Lawrence from Austria was a swimmer. Judith Deutsch from Austria was a swimmer. Lucy Goldner from Austria was also a swimmer. And there were a couple of other athletes who refused to participate. There was one Canadian athlete in the Winter Games who also refused to participate, a skier by the name of Lucan Robinson, and he did so out of principle. And he later joined the Canadian Army and fought with the Canadian Army in Europe against the Nazis. And when somebody asked him why he passed up his opportunity to go to the games in 1936, he said, well, look, I did the right thing because what we were doing was fighting what the Nazis were doing, and we've been successful in defeating them. So I feel vindicated in my decision not to go. So the other athletes that I want to talk about, two Jewish athletes from the United States who were on the American Olympic team, but were not given the opportunity to participate, were two members of the track team, one by the name of Martin Glickman and the other by the name of Sam Stoller. And we have a video of Martin Glickman talking about his disappointment in not being able to participate, even though he was a member of the team. So hopefully we'll be able to see that one. Well, we're going to see it in slow motion, which I don't think we want to watch. Okay.
Hang on, it's going to work. I believe it's going to work. Hang
Okay.
on.
Have faith.
What Nazism was. Remember, this is from the perspective of 2 years before Kristallnacht. The Holocaust was not only not a thought, it didn't exist in our imagination, in our dreams. I was on the team. It was a goal I had sought. Holocaust was a word that I didn't even know in 1936. The 400-meter relay was selected beforehand. Sam Stoller would start. I was to run the second leg. Floyd Draper run the third leg, and Frank Wyckoff run the anchor leg. The morning of the day we were supposed to run in the trial heats, we were called into a meeting, the 7 sprinters were, along with Dean Cromwell, the assistant head track coach, and Lawson Robertson, the head track coach. And Robertson announced to the 7 of us that he'd heard very strong rumors that the Germans were saving their best sprinters, hiding them to upset the American team in the 400 relay. And consequently, Sam and I were to be replaced by Jesse Owens and Ralph Metcalf. We were shocked. Sam was completely stunned. He didn't say a word in the meeting. Watching the final, all sorts of emotions flashed through my being. Frustration, certainly. Anger, certainly. I look out on the track and I see Metcalf passing runners down the backstretch. He ran the second leg. And that should be me out there. That should be me. That's me out there. Anti-Semitism was the basic reason, I believe, that Sam and I didn't get to run the Olympic Games. Here were the great black athletes who couldn't be kept off the winning podium. They were marvelous. But here were two rather obscure Jewish American athletes who could be kept from the winning podium so as not to further embarrass Adolf Hitler. But what happened to me was as nothing compared to that which took place later on. There was just no comparison. I was there, and that mattered. What took place was much, much more important afterwards.
Finals of the wrestling competition between the German champion and the Hungarian champion. The Hungarian champion happened to be Jewish. Károly Kárpáti beat the German champion decidedly. He was hailed as a national hero in Hungary. Yet during the Holocaust, he was hauled to the Ukraine in a forced labor company, which the Hungarians established. very, very close to the famous Hungarian fencer, Attila Pecsár. He was an Olympic champion who died in the Holocaust. In order to kill a human being, you have to dehumanize first, to create an image which is not human anymore. So you have no compunction, or you have no issue to kill or eliminate. The Olympic Games was a stepping stone of this exclusion. And obviously, the 1936 Games provided the legitimacy to the Nazi regime, which led later toward the final solution.
Okay, so as you saw from the video of Martin Glickman, that was who was speaking, he was terribly upset by the fact that he was removed at the last minute from the 4x100 relay team, one of the important events at any Olympics. And it was done, as I said, at the last minute, and the two runners, Sam Stoller and Martin Glickman, were replaced by Jesse Owens, who obviously was an incredible athlete, and Robert Metcalfe. But it's clear from the results of that race, whether you needed Jesse Owens or Robert Metcalfe was certainly debatable, because even without them, clearly Martin Glickman and Sam Stoller would have been able to lead the American team to the gold medal in that event. Now, Martin Glickman became famous in another way. When he returned to the States and after he'd finished college, he became perhaps one of the preeminent broadcasters of his age. He was a broadcaster for the New York Knicks for over 20 years, for the New York Rangers over 20 years, and the New York Giants football team as well. He was the second broadcaster ever to be inducted into the Basketball Hall of Fame. He later mentored other famous broadcasters like Marv Albert, who we all know, and Jim Kelly, who used to be the quarterback for the Buffalo Bills. So he had an illustrious career, but you could see how upset he was when that documentary was filmed at being removed. And it's clear when you look at some of the material that the reason why those two runners were removed was anti-Semitism or a desire not to upset Hitler. As you may know, the head of the American Olympic Committee at the time was a man by the name of Avery Brundage, who later became the head of the IOC, the International Olympic Committee. And he is recognized as an anti-Semite. He was the head of the IOC when the Israeli athletes were murdered in Munich in 1972, and who refused to halt the games other than for the one day, to cancel the games. And he, while he was in the position as the head of the IOC, refused to create a permanent memorial to the Israeli athletes killed at the Munich Games. So I think Martin Glickman was clearly right when he said anti-Semitism prevented him and Sam Stoller from running in that race. And you saw at the end of that video images of a number of the Jewish athletes who died during the Holocaust. And I'm going to come back to that in a minute. Before I do that, I just want to mention another Jewish athlete who bettered the Germans just before the war started. And it's somebody I'd never heard of until about a couple of months ago, when I saw that there was a book about a race car driver by the name of Rene Dreyfus. I don't know if he's related to Alfred Dreyfus, but Rene Dreyfus was quite a famous race car driver in Grand Prix kinds of races. And in 1938, he hooked up with an American couple, a wealthy American couple, to get a car which they believed would be able to win one of the Grand Prix events. And the team that they were mainly competing against was the team from Mercedes, who at the time probably had the best cars on the racetrack. Rene Dreyfus and his American supporters were in fact able to put together a car from a company that I'd never heard of, De La Haye, and they in fact won the Grand Prix event, beating out the Mercedes team. And shortly after that, obviously it was 1938, the war was about to start. Dreyfus served in the French army for a short period of time. He eventually left and went to the United States. He enlisted in the American army, and he was an interrogator in Italy during the Italian campaign on behalf of the Americans. He continued racing for a short period of time, but eventually after the war retired and set up a restaurant with his brother in New York City, Chanticleer, which was in existence for many, many years. The book is a fascinating read about the time. And one of the interesting facts that come out is the car that he used in that race. After the war started, the French decided to hide the car so that in the event that the Germans invaded, they could not find the car and destroy it. So the car disappeared from sight. Nobody has seen it, but clearly the French wanted to prevent the Germans from getting their hands on the car. So the war starts, and of course, athletes did not hold any special place in the German lexicon. Athletes were treated in much the same way as everybody else. There were athletes who were able to survive, either in hiding. Not many were able to leave the country or the other countries that Germany occupied. A couple, as I said, did survive in hiding, but many athletes were killed in the camps. One of the images you saw was of Lily Hanoch, who, as I said, was a 4-event track star for Germany who was prevented from participating in the 1936 games. She died, as many of the athletes did, in Auschwitz. One of the other images you saw was of a famous Hungarian fencer by the name of Attila Petschauer. And he also was killed, but he wasn't killed in Auschwitz. If you have seen the movie Sunshine, which starred Ralph Fiennes, he played a character similar to Attila Petschauer, who was a fencer. And one of the scenes in the movie is based on something that is rumored to have happened to Petschauer in his camp. The German soldiers, obviously, as he became weak in the camp, made fun of him as the Olympic fencer, and eventually they required him to climb a tree. And this is the scene that's depicted in the movie. He climbs a tree in the middle of winter, and they turn the hoses on him so that basically he becomes encrusted in ice, and that's how he dies. So not only were athletes killed, but they were killed in ways that we could only describe as really torture. Some of the other tragedies among the Olympic athletes involved the 1928 Dutch gymnastic team. 5 of the leading members of that team were Jewish girls. Their coach was Jewish, and all of them perished in Auschwitz. So, as I said, many athletes, Olympic level athletes and other athletes died in the Holocaust. I want to mention, again, something that certainly I wasn't aware of before I started to do this research last year. There were a large number of famous Jewish soccer players, or European football players, before the war in particular, and there were many what would be called, quote, Jewish teams, unquote, at the time in a variety of capital cities like Vienna and Budapest, and even in Germany. And a number of these teams were incredibly successful. There's a story of a team from Vienna called Vienna HaKoach, so clearly a Jewish team. Many of the players were Jewish, but not all of them. And they were invited to participate in 1929 in an exhibition match with first level English team, West Ham, and it was expected that the Viennese team would be slaughtered. In the match in Vienna, they played to a draw. In the subsequent match in England, the Vienna HaKoach team beat the English team 5-0, with 4 of the goals being scored by Jewish players on the team. Unfortunately, many of the Jewish stars playing soccer died in the war. One in particular that I want to mention, because his death is unusual. There was a player who played for one of the great teams in the Netherlands, Ajax of Amsterdam. His name was Eddie Hamel. He was actually an American playing soccer in the Netherlands. And unfortunately, he was caught up in the Holocaust and died in one of the concentration camps. As I said, many athletes were killed. Some survived. But the Jewish athletics and athletes did not come to an end with the end of the war. Before I get to what happened after the war, I just want to mention one Italian athlete, not Jewish, who I could talk about in the talk about rescuers, but I thought it would be appropriate to talk about him in this context, in the context of athletes. And his name is Gino Bartoli. And he was a famous Italian cyclist. And we have a short video, which hopefully will work. And you'll learn a little bit about him, and I'll add in some more.
He is one of the world's top cyclists and also a hero of the Holocaust. Italian Gino Bartoli became a champion on the world sports stage in 1936, winning the Giro d'Italia, and came back the next year to win again. He cemented his status as a star in his sport in 1938, finishing first in the Tour de France. But his 1938 win would come at the start of a gloomy time for Jews in Italy, when fascists would take away many of their rights, including confiscating their Italian citizenship and property, expelling them from jobs, and also barring them from schools. Then in September 1943, the Nazis invaded and occupied northern Italy, searching for Jews and sending them to concentration camps. It was then when the Cardinal of Florence asked Bartoli, a devoted Catholic, to become a part of a secret network which offered Italy's Jews protection and safe passage. The record-breaking cyclist would then become a war hero, smuggling photographs and fake documents within the frame and handlebars of his bicycle, saving the lives of 800 Jews. But that wouldn't be the only risk Bartoli would take. Bartoli also hid the family of his Jewish friend Giacomo Goldenberg. And in 2013, 13 years after his death, Bartoli was named a righteous among the nations by Yad Vashem. And in the words of Gino's own son, Andrea, when people would tell his father, Gino, "You're a hero," he would respond,
No, I want to be remembered for my sporting achievements. Real heroes are others, those who have suffered in their soul. in their heart, in their spirit, their mind for their loved ones. Those are the real heroes. I'm just a cyclist.
And today, Gino Bartoli's legacy lives on with the Giro d'Italia, one of cycling's 3 grand tours taking place this year in Israel to pay tribute to his heroic story. Erica Jackson, I-24 News.
Okay, so that's a short clip explaining a little bit of what Bartoli was doing. As was apparent from the clip, he was world famous and certainly really famous in Italy, looked up to by Italians because he won the Giro d'Italia in 2 straight years. He won the Tour de France in one of those years as well. And when he was approached by the Cardinal to assist in saving or helping to save Jews, he didn't hesitate. And what he did is he basically rode his bicycle from place to place. If he was stopped by the Germans, he simply told them that he was training. They never intervened or interfered with what he was doing. All the while, he held those forged documents and photographs in the bars of his bike. And as a result of his efforts, he was able to save probably more than 100 Jews, in addition to the Jews that he himself hid in his home. Now, the other remarkable feat of Bartoli was, obviously that's incredible in and of itself, that he risked his life to save Jews who he didn't know, other than the family that he hid. 1948, 10 years after he won the Tour de France, he won the Tour de France again. That's the longest time period to have elapsed between victories in the Tour de France. And that's a record that still stands. The other remarkable thing is, like many heroes of the Holocaust and righteous among the nations, Bartoli never bragged about what he did. He never even talked about what he did, except late in life to his son. And he did it in large part out of his own personal religious beliefs, and therefore didn't think it was important to brag about it. So he was an amazing athlete and an amazing person, obviously. So what happens to Jewish athletes after the war? I want to highlight a number of them in the time that I have left. There are 2 who actually survived the Holocaust that I want to mention particularly. There are 2 female athletes. One was involved in swimming and one was involved in gymnastics. Agnes Coletti is the gymnast who survived the war. She was in hiding for part of the time and did survive the war. And in 1952, at the age of 31, she participated in the Olympics as a gymnast and won 6 medals. 4 gold, I think 4 gold and 2 other medals. At the age of 35, she again participated in the Olympics in Melbourne in 1956. Certainly one of the oldest, if not the oldest, athlete in gymnastics ever. And she won again a total of 4 medals. So she had 10 Olympic medals that she won in the 2 Olympics in which she participated. That record as a female athlete at the Olympics is only broken by an American swimmer by the name of Dana Torres, who this morning I recalled because when she participated in her last of the 5 Olympics in which she participated, she won a medal as a member of a relay team in swimming. That was the 12th medal in her Olympic career. Agnes Coletti is still alive. She is the oldest surviving Olympian. After 1956 in Melbourne, she defected, eventually made her way to Israel, where she became a phys ed instructor at Tel Aviv University and also a gymnastics coach. The other woman is a woman by the name of Eva Seke. She participated in 3 Olympics, 1948, 1952, and 1956. She won a gold medal in 52 in her event, and in 1956 won a bronze. She only passed away earlier this year at the age of 92. So obviously these athletes live a long life. Her daughter also became an Olympian and participated in the 1972 Munich Games and won a silver in the 100-meter backstroke and also a bronze in the 100-meter butterfly. So those are two athletes who survived the war, who were athletes before the Olympics, before the war and the Holocaust. Ben Helfgott was an Olympian for Great Britain. He was a child during the Holocaust and was able to come to England after the war as one of the Windermere Boys. And if you are participants in the Toronto Jewish Film Festival, they showed a documentary about the Windermere Boys this year. There's also a BBC documentary about them. The Windermere Boys were about 750 boys. They weren't all boys. There were a number of girls as well, who were brought to England by Jewish organizations as orphans after the war. Ben Helfgott became an Olympic weightlifter, participated in 2 Olympic Games. He was the captain of the weightlifting team. After his sporting career, he became an educator about the Holocaust, and as a result of his efforts in that area, he was knighted by Queen Elizabeth a few years ago. Another Olympian who participated before the war and after is a Algerian French swimmer by the name of Alfred Nakache. He participated in 36 and also in 1948. He was known as, his nickname became the Auschwitz swimmer. He was sent to Auschwitz and was able to train because he would swim in one of the big water tanks at Auschwitz. That's how he kept in shape, and that's how he was able to participate in the games in 1948. There's a movie made about Alfred Nakache, and the person who plays him in the film is a French Jewish swimmer by the name of Fabien Gillot. Gillot participated in 3 Olympics and won a number of medals. And every time that he won an Olympic medal, he dedicated the medal to his grandfather, who was a Holocaust survivor. I want to mention one Canadian, I don't think you can call her an athlete per se, although she was obviously an athlete in her younger years. But Ellen Burka, which some of us might remember, was a figure skating coach. She coached her daughter, Petra Burka, who was on the Canadian Olympic team and participated in many world championships. But she's probably better known, or at least equally known, as the coach for Taller Cranston. And her coaching resulted in Taller Cranston adopting a new style of men's figure skating, which since Taller Cranston really has become sort of the style for male figure skaters, with much more flair and drama than had been the case before. The last Olympian I want to mention before I get onto another topic for a bit is an Israeli by the name of Shaul Ladani. Shaul Ladani was 8 years old when he was sent to the camps. He survived the war. He eventually made it to Israel. And his athletic career was spent in race walking. And he would do 100-mile races and 50-mile races. He participated in the 1972 Olympic Games as an Israeli athlete. He was one of 5 Israeli athletes who survived the massacre in 1972. And he did so because when he heard the commotion in one of the other rooms, he decided to take off, and he just ran and was able to escape that way. Now, I mentioned the role that Jews played in soccer before the war. They played a role also after the war in a slightly different form. Two of the great coaches in European soccer were Jews. One was a fellow by the name of Bela Gutmann, and the other one was, his name was Erno Erbstein. And both of them were involved in soccer, obviously, before the war. They were players, but after the war, they became coaches. Bela Gutmann coached for 5 different teams. As he said, he coached every team for about 2 years until they got sick of him and they got fired. But his real success came with a team called Beneficia, where he won the European Soccer Championship as their coach in 1961 and 1962. The other one, Erno Erbstein, is famous for coaching before the war, and he became sort of a trainer coach after the war. And he was involved in a team called Torino, which was the class of European soccer at one time, immediately after the war. Unfortunately, and again, I've read about this incident. I wasn't alive at the time. But in 1949, the Torino team was flying to play a match, and unfortunately their plane crashed, and everybody on board was killed, including most of the members of the team, plus Erno Erbstein. So they are now acknowledged in a number of books, which you will have on the list that I believe Sigal provided to you, with their life stories of their influence on the game of soccer. For example, Bela Gutmann is famous for creating the format of the 4-2-4 structure on the field. And that is now the structure that's used for many soccer teams. The last point I want to make also relates to soccer, and it sort of relates to what's going on in the world today. Soccer is unfortunately well known for its hooliganism, and in recent years is known for its racist taunts of players and spectators. And there are a number of incidents that are reported every year about taunts, particularly in respect of Black players. And so racism has become an important, and it has become a feature of European soccer. And it's the goal of many of these leagues and teams to try to address racism. Even in today's papers, there were some articles about players taking a knee before the start of their seasons. The only league that's really started is the German Bundesliga. But obviously there's a significant desire to stamp out racism in European soccer. There is an effort on the part of FIFA, which is the organization for soccer. And there's also an effort by a number of teams, particularly one I want to mention, which is Chelsea, which is owned by a Russian Jew. And they have made significant efforts to try to address racism. One of the things that some professional teams have done and some amateur teams have done is to take the team as a whole to particular sites to learn about the Holocaust in particular. So for example, teams have been, before the European Cup in 2012, a number of teams visited Auschwitz as a team. At least a couple of American college basketball teams have gone to either Auschwitz or to the Holocaust Museum in Washington. And one of the leading spokespeople about the importance of recognizing the Holocaust and learning from the Holocaust is a famous Hall of Fame basketball player by the name of Ray Allen. We have one last clip to show you about Ray Allen visiting the Holocaust Museum in Washington with his Miami Heat teammates after they'd won one of their championships. So yeah, hopefully we'll be able to see this as well.
Hello, everybody, and thank you for a moment of your attention here at halftime. I think you're all familiar with the Heat's recent trip to Washington, D.C., where Miami met with the President of the United States in recognition of their second straight NBA championship. But the night before that visit to the White House, something very special happened for the Miami Heat. We found out about it on the plane flight from Miami to Washington, D.C., that Ray Allen had organized a private tour of the Holocaust Memorial Museum in Washington, D.C., just for the Miami Heat. As soon as we heard about that, myself and Spanish radio voice Jose Pineda, we knew we had to be a part of that tour. Folks, it wasn't easy to go through the Holocaust Museum, but it was so worthwhile. You learned so much about a horrific period in world history. We also found out the kind of compassion that Ray Allen is all about. Take a look at the video. While in Washington, D.C., Ray Allen organized a trip for his teammates and several Heat staff to visit the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum to learn about one of the worst moments in human history.
This institution was created to remember the Holocaust, but remember the Holocaust and remember the victims by teaching generations to come. They're the generation. In another handful of years, they're going to be where you are, and they're going to have to pass this message along to their kids.
This is like my 6th or 7th time coming here. I know how I feel every time I come out. You know, just the different stories, different things jump out at you. And this was a classic example of a great atrocity to humanity.
They're posing for these photos. They're about to kill these people. They don't feel that what they're doing is wrong.
You know, Ray brought the idea to the team, and everybody wanted to be a part of it. It was a very sobering day. Incredibly eye-opening to see that this could actually happen in a lifetime.
Each of these barracks, there are about 36 bunks that hold 18 to 24 people on each bunk. Look at how many barracks are lined up. This is half of Auschwitz.
Speaking with UD and what he saw in there, I saw it on his face. He was like, you know, he had a moment of, you know, just a pause where he had to realize, wow, what I just experienced was touching.
My wife is, you know, half Jewish. You know, I thought it would be great for her to come, and I just thought it'd be something great for us to do together. It was just an opportunity to educate one another on history, and you know, you get, you know, such a small piece of this history, you know, from school. You know, but just an hour and a half that we spent here was very, very, very powerful.
It could be a lot of places. And the fact that they make the time to come here to think about it, it'll affect each of them in a different way. But we're delighted to be part of that. We're delighted to impart the experience. And I do hope that some seeds were planted. And quite frankly, from the reactions that I saw, I think that's definitely the case.
That's a great thing about this team. This team is concerned with things outside of basketball, things about humanity. And it's just such a dark period in humanity's time. And the human soul is a very precious thing. And when even one is wasted, it's a terrible travesty.
My wife, who is Italian, heard stories from her family. Her grandfather had to hide them from the Germans because they were killing Italians. So this is a very interesting trip for me.
We as people need to do a better job of taking care of each other. This museum will make you, at least allow you to understand that, you know, there's a greater purpose for all of us, and, you know, taking care of humankind is, you know, it's a simple act, but it's something that we all need to do a better job of.
So I hope you enjoyed my presentation. I want to dedicate my presentation to the Holocaust survivors, and especially to the survivors who have been felled by the coronavirus in recent days. So I'm happy to take any questions or comments if we have some.
Just to let you know, everybody, you're now able to unmute yourself. If you're having a hard time with the chat, you can absolutely unmute yourself. I'm also going to put us on gallery view, so if they maybe want to raise their hand, Eric, you can see who you can see and pick.
Okay.
Does anybody have any questions? You did such a good job there, no question.
Well, that's good.
If I may, I would just like to thank you very much. It was very instructive, very enjoyable, and definitely part of our history that we should all be aware of. Thank you.
Amen.
Stephen Kraft has a question.
Eric, that was superb. I'm really glad I had the chance to hear that. One other thing, there's so many stories you could probably talk about. You can talk about the athletes being taken to significant places. You may be aware that Robert Kraft, who owns the New England Patriots, who have won so many Super Bowls, I think they'll probably name the Super Bowl after them. But you may be aware that about 4 or 5 years ago, after their championship, he took about 15 or 20 members of the team to Israel, including to Yad Vashem.
Yes.
And among all the stories, I don't want to belabor it, but one of the stories that was very touching is that Tom Brady, who was the all-star quarterback, his wife was on the trip, and when they came back, she started to light Shabbos candles.
No, I didn't hear that. I knew they'd taken that trip.
Yeah, and they went to Yad Vashem and got a private tour there, and so it was such an impact that many of the players, none of whom, I don't think any were Jewish, of course, none of them were Jewish. I don't know about the coaches and that, but they were so moved by what they saw that a couple of them have taken on some of these customs that that we do. So, it's quite touching when these athletes, who you revere from all their sporting accomplishments, go and see such a human side of things.
And they do have one Jewish athlete who is a star on that team. That's Julian Edelman.
Okay.
Who's been great receivers for Tom Brady for the many, many years.
Yeah. So it's nice to see another story, of it's Ray Allen. I didn't know that this.
Any last questions?
Yes. Just one last comment, that when Eric was talking about that swimmer who won the medals so many years apart, and then mentioned Dana Torres. Dana Torres is Jewish as well.
Yes, of course.
Eric?
Yes.
I have a small comment, an interesting aside, that when Jesse Owens was appointed to do the 4x100 and Glickman was bypassed, evidently Jesse Owens said, I don't want to do the race. He said, I have enough medals already. He had already accomplished 3.
Yes.
And the coach went over to him and said, you're racing. And so they said to Jesse Owens, why didn't you race? He says, when you're a black athlete and your coach tells you to do something, you listen.
Yeah, I've heard that story.
And evidently the next, the addendum to that was when he was supposedly went up to Hitler, Hitler wouldn't shake his hand. He said that never happened. He said he never went to Hitler. Hitler didn't ignore him, and he didn't want to have anything to do with Hitler. So there's a few stories floating around as sort of poetic license, but fascinating guy, Glickman. I'm sure you've seen the movie on him.
Yes.
Wonderful movie, very accomplished man. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Wonderful presentation.
So just by way of announcements, I'm hoping you're seeing my screen. The next class is next Wednesday, God willing, the 18th of June at the same time. Please make sure that you register again via the website or through me so that we can send you the links and any additional source material that Eric would like to share. And then the last one will be the 25th of June, featuring rescuers and the Holocaust, also at 1:30 with the last registration required from you. I just want to take a quick opportunity to also echo your sentiment and thank Eric profusely for doing this for us. Extremely informative, difficult material, but important material to be shared and understood. So thank you very, very much. I apologize for the slight glitch. I will make sure that the video link gets posted on the website along with the recording of the class so that you guys can get a chance to catch up on what we missed. Again, very, very apologetic. And I just want to thank also the Adult Education Committee at the HICFA for all of their efforts, Stan Solomon and Lionel Berger for their vision and idea to bring this program forward, and to get Eric to say yes to doing this really, really important series. Thank you, thank you, thank you. And I hope everybody has a great rest of the day.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, Eric.
Thank you.
Take care, everybody. Stay well.
You too.